I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Angela.
We are the Ink Mages. Join us as we discuss all things fantasy, world building, storycraft, myths and legends, and of course, our own imaginative stories. Welcome to the Ink Mages podcast. We are so glad that you have joined us for one of our nerdy author interviews. Today we have author Mikel Melwasul and his co-author David Tulluis, who are going to be joining us in the studio today. So a little background on Mikel. He developed a love for fantasy at a young age when his father read The Hobbit and the Chronicles of Narnia to him before bed. Mick grew up in Maryland, but now lives in South Georgia with his wife. He earned a degree in criminal justice while supporting himself, and now works as a background check company, all the while pursuing his love of fantasy and writing. So his co-author, who's going to be with us, David Tulluis, they wrote the book Paragon Exordium together, which is an epic apocalyptic fantasy. So we are excited to dive in and know more about this book. So let's bring these authors onto the show.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Welcome to
Hey guys.
Ink Mages.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
We are so excited to have you on the show. We're excited to find out more about you and your fantastic book. But first, we love our fantasy nerd facts. Mikel, why don't you start us off?
Okay, I've got a lot, but I think I narrowed it down. I thought in advance about this. So in high school and middle school, I was so well known for my sword fighting talents that people would show up at my house in my neighborhood at random and challenge me to sword fights.
And wasn't there something about you having a special sword at your wedding?
Yeah, so actually, I gave all my groomsmen swords to wear at my wedding. So I wore one, and all my groomsmen have them, and my wife has one. And I do a sort of book cosplay for a lot of my videos. I'm not at home right now, so I don't have the outfit, but I wear the Witch King of Angmar's sword from Lord of the Rings. And I also have a cheap replica of Aragorn's sword as well.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
yes.
Recognized it immediately.
How about you, David?
First, let me say, while I was not able to attend said wedding, my favorite sword that was given out wasn't a sword. It was the Robert Baratheon's Warhammer.
Oh my gosh.
To one of our mutual friends, which every time I see it or remember that is a fact, I'm like, yeah, you gave everyone swords and this guy a hammer, which was well deserved, knowing his personality. So I stray a lot less fantasy nerd and more science fiction nerd, which I know I'm in good company.
Yes.
Nerd fact for me, when we were in college, my claim to fame during college was that I was president of the Nerf Zombie Club, Humans vs. Zombies.
Gosh, that sounds awesome.
So it's
That's a cool
game whereby everyone signs up, right? And during a 2-week span, the whole campus outside is in game, in bounds. And if you're of the human survivor variety, if you're tagged by the zombie, you switch, right? And it's all tracked, and it's at all times for 2 weeks outside of buildings. So you're going between classes, engaging in gunfights with the enemy, and then there'd be some peace times called, and at night, mass gatherings of everyone to come out and play missions, right? And we themed them all different things for different years, sometimes fantasy, sometimes movie themed. I know.
Wow.
So there were some good ones. One of my personal favorites was Mick's Fury Road.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We had a lot of fun. And I like to tell people that I met my wife at the barrel of a gun.
Because we both did.
You know, you as well.
Oh my goodness.
So I was the nasty zombie coming to claim her human card. So we ended up working out at the end, right? A little bit of a violent start, but we're happy with it. So.
I think that's one of the funniest nerd facts we've heard.
Yes, for sure. That's awesome.
It gets better too, because we both that's how we met. That's how we met our wives playing that game. And then I organized a travel game. So there's travel games you can go to other colleges and play. There's international games and stuff. I organized and created an entire game at a college a couple hours away to propose to my wife. So everyone was like all their deaths were planned in advance, and like it was down to the last 2 of us making a final stand against like 50 people. And then I turned and I literally, as I popped the lid off the ring, I was like, "Hey, Morgan," and she goes, "Not right now, Mick. I'm trying to survive." Then turned and saw, "Oh, the ring. Oh, okay." And all the zombies stopped and like, "Yay!"
Oh my gosh, that is.
When you guys all
epic.
cosplayed, like looking like zombies while this was happening?
Sometimes, yeah, and then we'd have thematic games. So like we had a Mad Max game. So like the people running it, the refs would dress up like characters and do like NPC acting. So I pretended I was Mad Max and like I wouldn't say anything and I just gestured towards stuff. And there was like a Greek game. There are lots of different themes. You could do whatever you want to apply to it.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so fun. I feel like I missed out. You need to like rewind and go back.
Right.
So, Mick, tell us like a little bit about your writing journeys.
Yeah. So I had the original concept for my book when I was like in high school. I watched Rain of Fire. I watched, I'm going to draw a blank on it again. I did this the other day. A movie. Dave, help.
I don't know what you're looking at me for, man.
Who stars in it? Who stars in it?
Yeah, that's what helps.
It's an 80s action movie with communists invading America.
Red Dawn?
Red Dawn.
Red
Yes,
Dawn.
Red Dawn.
Yes.
I was reading
Red
Lord of
Dawn.
the Rings.
Okay.
My dad showed me Red Dawn. I had a dream that was a combination of Lord of the Rings and Red Dawn. That's where I got the idea.
Wow.
Awesome.
And then I just took notes and world built that up in through college. And then once I graduated from college, I had some time before my wife graduated. I was debt free because I worked my hands to the bone throughout college to pay my way through. So I was like, you know what? Now's the time. If I'm ever going to write this, I'm going to try and do it now. So I actually hand wrote the first act, a couple hundred pages, just as a challenge for myself. I have essential tremors. So the summer before, I relearned how to write so my writing would be more legible. So I retaught myself the alphabet at like 22. And then I hand wrote it just as a challenge because, like, okay, I know there's some writers like Ray Bradbury would use a typewriter for all his stuff. So he didn't have the ability to just backspace and stuff. So that's how I did the first act. And then my buddy Dave was in the he was an English major. So I'm like, hey, man, would you mind taking a look at the story I'm working on it and give me your feedback? And what ended up happening was every weekend for the next 7 years, we just met and talked it over. And he provided a ton of feedback. And originally he was like an alpha reader / editor, but he's been such an instrumental part of the story that I'm like, you're a co-author. Like you don't get any other honorific. Even if I write 95% of the words, you're so involved in this story and the words that are chosen and what gets rewritten. And we have rules involved. Like if his eyes glaze over on something, it means I'm going into too much detail and it's too much exposition and I got to reel it back. Mm-hmm. Right. So he helps balance that out. My wife is also an English major. She's an English teacher. She helps balance it out too. But we just finally got to the point after a year of querying and over 100 rejections from people being like, hey, you're an indie author. This is cool, but you're an indie author. This is not fairy smut. And it's a long book. So pass. We're like, okay, you know what? Let's get the story out there. Let's self-publish it.
Yeah. How did that look for you, David, being a co-author and kind of jumping in on that whole creative process?
Yeah, so much as Mick described, right? I kind of came in as an extra set of eyes at the beginning. I was like, hey, yeah, that's up my wheelhouse. I'm totally down, for the cause here to see how it goes. And as the project sort of evolved into looking more like what it is now, it's more input, more time together, going over things, what was grammar content became, world building became,
wow.
What do we think about this? What do we think about that? And then, yeah, it was a weekly discussion that was, countless hours of our time together as it progressed. And something I told Mick from the beginning, anytime, my eyes glazed over or something didn't go the way we wanted and we had to, make a change is, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't believe in it. And so, yeah, 7 years later, we're sitting here doing this. So, it's been interesting ingratiating myself. I can't say that it was difficult, breaking into someone else's space, so to speak, because, it was kind of the doors were thrown open to do it. So.
How long is the book, like word count wise? Because Mick, you said you wrote like the first act just on, paper. So I'm curious, like how long it got.
It's 231,000 words.
Okay, so that's an epic for sure.
Yeah.
Quite large.
That's a conservative estimate.
Yeah. I thought my book was long. My first book was 190,000 words when all said and done. And
Nice.
then it became much less after.
Right. I mean, we cut a lot too. We went through 6 or 7 rounds of editing on this.
Wow. Wow. That had to do something special for the two of you to be spending that much time in the same world, kind of developing this together.
Yeah.
I definitely say so. As discussed, right? The discussions about, hey, what would this character do? What would this character do? Quickly became, well, this whole race of people do this sort of way, and then sessions that were simply building this kind of as
right.
trying to build a car as it's driving sort of situation, right? The reason, part of the reason it ended up being, as long as it was, there's multiple points of view, and it just parts that, make, kind of, you had maybe a page of content for something when you first wrote it became, a sort of, B plot or arc to something else. Right. And as it settled out, when you look back, it's thick. So.
Wow. That's amazing. I love hearing that you guys got to do this together and develop it together. It kind of inspires me because there's nothing I love more is when someone's actually interested in all of the things that I've spent so much of my own headspace in writing. To be able to include somebody in that headspace. That's kind of, Stephanie's that person for me a little bit because we've been authoring together our own separate books and reading each other's books and giving each other input. But I just kind of think that sounds like such a fantastic journey to go on with somebody and to have this completed book that's out there that you did together. Is that something you guys think you will do again together?
Well,
yeah. We're working on book 2. This is the first of 3
wow.
for the first series.
Wow.
We have 2 follow-up series, one of which I think was completely Dave's own original idea, where he's like, hey, let me pitch this to you, and he threw it at me. He's also working on a novella that is going to be a sort of Southern Gothic horror novella based on some characters that disappear in book 1. And we're working on that together, but it's sort of a role reversal where he's the main person behind that, and then I'm just providing him with feedback. And we're taking a lot of inspiration from the Odyssey for that, which is very exciting for me because I love Greek. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you want to pitch in on that as well, Dave, as long as you're not going to say, hey, no, this is it, we're done.
No. Yeah, the story is self-contained, but it has legs, right? There's part of building a world as we have done, right, is that, it comes alive, and, there's plenty of different ways that it could jet off and have other people, put their own kind of spin on that. I think, one of the reasons that I find, a pre-done or already existing world like a Star Wars galaxy or something entertaining or compelling is because, there's room to tell almost whatever story you want in the framework of the world that's been created. And I think in this case for us, that's definitely possible. And, I'm kind of doing a little proof of concept, definitely not a 230,000 word attempt, but we'll see. Mick will be here to keep me honest and make sure I don't go back on anything that we had done several years ago and make changes.
Right.
I guess a curious question, because with your guys' world building, with all the little zombie, games that you put together, did that kind of help with brainstorming ideas for this book? Like, did you take a lot of inspiration from stuff that you already crafted by doing the little fun zombie games?
Well, I think short answer, yes. Being in that space for those sort of creative outlets, when we were in school, this is end of the 2010s timeframe, right? The whole zombie survival apocalypse horror genre was kind of at its zenith at that time, right? So culturally, there was a lot flowing around that, which kind of led to that game being as popular as it was. So I think a lot of those themes that came up, that would make compelling game for people to play, like a video game or a physical game in person, translate pretty well to some of the things that have come up. I do think back, right? I mean, some of the themes that we had, given that it's a zombie game, right, all sort of dovetail with the apocalyptic story that, we're that world that's in, where, everything has fallen apart and we need to put the pieces back together, is indicative of our experience playing a, zombie horror game, just, running around in person, not writing it down. So I that's from my side, Mick. I don't know what you think about that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was super informative on a number of levels. It taught me a lot about human psyche, and the individual and their predisposition for panic, right? The average person has a massive predisposition for panic. Most people don't survive this game. We would have, more than often, it would be 5 to 10% of people make it to the end. And playing the game, I would see groups of like 5 people with blasters running from 2 people who have to touch it with their hands, right? And there's a certain mentality that you discover that the average person doesn't have. The average person panics at the drop of a hat. Even when they have an advantage of range and numbers, they will flee at the sight of confrontation. So that sort of theme feeds into the story and a lot of character decisions, and is a big inspiration for like one of the main characters being a military personnel. It's like we need someone who has the wherewithal to actually survive and lead in this world for the story to have a level of realism to it, right? And then there's elements of it. The game got somewhat political, because things do in college. There's drama involved, and so there's political elements, especially in book 2, that are heavily inspired by the events and how things went down, and sort of the death of that organization. Due to weird politics in college that really shouldn't have happened, but how people with power interact with people without it, and how that affects those around them, and it's amplified by these life or death situations, right? And so that feeds into our story and my experiences with that, and decision making, and what it means to be a leader, and all that. So it's very heavily influenced my writing in a lot of ways, just through interaction with people, because it's a long story, it's a fantasy story, but it's extremely character driven, and a lot of these characters are based on or named after people I've known. Now they've evolved drastically into their own people, right, but that's where I draw a lot of that inspiration. And we had one person who finished reading it recently, who's like, wow, the way they go into planning their missions reminds me so much of when we used to play HVZ, and the tactical decisions, and hey, here's what we need to do, here are the sacrifices we can make in order to get through this, and here's the risk and the overwhelming odds we have to surpass in order to survive.
So you said that you have multiple POVs. So how many POVs do you have? Tell us a little bit more about your main characters in the story.
Yeah, so there are 3 main POVs, and then we have some bonus POVs. So we've got some bonus POVs. We've got a bonus POV, which is Shadowfang the Basilisk. We get an entire chapter from the point of view of a basilisk that's eating people, which is a lot of fun.
Let's go.
We've got a bonus POV that is a dryad that is basically doing a Vulcan mind meld with a dwarf, which is a lot of fun. A very challenging chapter to write, but it's one that we're really proud of, because we really intentionally changed and used certain language to reflect that. And we had to get in the headspace of something that is so alien to humanity. Exploring another alien to humanity mind. So it's a really interesting chapter. But we've got 3 main POVs that would be Peter Blair, Sarah Young, and Sean Castillo. Do you want to give a little detail on each of them, Dave?
Certainly. So as Mick described, for the sort of military-minded character, Peter Blair is a former stand-up military personnel who has gone private. And him and his, private security elements that happen to be in this town end up, de facto sort of helping to hold the place together at the beginning, due to, having that bond already, having, the equipment, the training to sort of, keep something going when society sort of falls apart. He ends up, being a very divisive figure based on some of his decisions early on, and that leads to them sort of self-exiling to go out to, hey, we're going to go help away from here so everything cools off. But he's, very driven and more in that leadership kind of mindset, more worldly experience a little bit than the other 2 characters, the oldest one, right? And, man on a mission with some intrinsic flaws. Sarah is a college student, right? The town it's based on is a college town. And someone who's, surviving this apocalypse, sort of helping, in a support capacity, right? Very young, and ends up, falling into this story and gaining some abilities that make her unique. And then she becomes, the focal point of, issues in the town, right? Hey, you suddenly have these abilities that people will want to control, which becomes a big part of her character. And then Sean is a kid who's now, sans parents due to events, right? And also sort of discovers he has some innate talents that might become useful. And with nothing else to lose, the outgoing group takes a chance on bringing him with them. And he experiences, this whole thing from the lens of someone who's very young, and not only trying to figure out an apocalypse, scenario, but just kind of figure out his own life like a young adult would have to do normally. It's just with a totally different lens of, the world that you were preparing to join is no longer a thing. So
I like that there's a wide age group. Like you have a kid, you have a college, and then a military person. That has a nice appeal for a lot of different age groups to read your book.
Yeah, and that's something we really leaned into. So like it's a dark fantasy, but it's a clean fantasy. There's no sexual content. There's some slight references to some violence, right? But there's also no cursing. There's implied cursing, but and like I said, it's violent because it's an apocalypse survival fantasy story. But we wanted to write something that would be accessible to all ages. So like we wrote it for adults, but you can read it at any age, and it's not hard to read either. We made it easy to read, and the story appeals to, I think, all ages. I had a reader recently who was a grandmother who said, "Hey, I just finished. I am so excited to give it to my 15-year-old grandson, so we can read it and discuss it together." So that's been a big goal of ours, is making sure it is accessible for all ages, even if our intended audience is adults, right? But that's been such a fun part of it, is having people of all ages dig into it and enjoy it. And just one thing I wanted to touch on to was Sarah Young. That's an interesting part about her character, is you find out almost immediately she's got magical abilities, right? And the story takes place in rural Georgia in the U.S.
Oh, neat.
So you now have a young lady who has magical abilities in rural Georgia during an apocalypse. And that is something we explore, and the ramifications and implications of that, with it being part of the Bible Belt and stuff, especially as the story goes on. She faces a lot of very unique challenges, and she has a lot of responsibility just inherently with this ability. And so that's one of the main kind of plot lines throughout that makes her character really interesting and really compelling to dig into.
Well, I'm just very interested because even just reading the blurb for your book and what it's about, we're not necessarily dealing with zombies, but kind of this awakening of magical creatures and fantasy characters. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Do you want to take that, Dave?
Sure. So
there's no zombies.
This well, I wouldn't write zombies off. Let's you haven't seen what I wrote.
Not going zombies.
This all came out, pre phase 3 Marvel, right? But I guess a way to appeal now would be sort of a snap happens, right? In a simplified manner. In eons past, right? Humans were behaving rather poorly, and so everyone else decided to shun us and let us do our own thing for a while. And now that's worn off all at once.
Wow.
So things that used to be there eons ago, right, all suddenly come back. And so they're used to dealing with humanity in a very different way, right? A kind of Bronze Age, medievalist age of humanity. And they're suddenly confronted with, not only are we globe spanning, but we have this immense amount of technology, and we're all totally different. And that causes a lot of issues for even friendly magical entities, right? Rolling up into a human controlled area now and being confronted with a military vehicle, right? Or someone with radio communication or things of that nature, right? So definitely an interesting way to do it, I would say. I think usually you see like a portal or some other kind of, plot device rather to get everything going. And this main event has so many ramifications for everything that happens in the future that we're very, I think, open and willing to be exploring that in future iterations here to see how else that's affected the whole planet, not just this small rural Georgia town.
Okay, well, Michael, I stumbled upon your TikTok account, and you have you get in full character with like your story. And so I've watched a couple of videos, and I responded to one because it was like tell me if I would survive this apocalypse
Oh,
by
I
the
haven't gotten to
weapons
that
that
one
I
yet.
have in my house. So I remember putting, I'm like, well, I've got Aragorn's sword, so I feel like my chances might be high.
Yes,
But
that is.
I totally love how you get into characters. So kind of tell a little bit like how that started, doing these little TikTok videos for your book.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had a love for fantasy. I love doing cosplay and stuff. So the character thing was literally, I started doing that this last week. So as a way to try and appeal and garner more interaction online, I was like, okay, well, if people will give me some details, I'll kind of rate their chances of surviving the first 30 days of the story. Because I saw another author who wrote a pirate story, and he would regularly dress up like a pirate for his videos. So, that's engaging, that's fun. So let me put together a bunch of equipment I have and try and dress like a character from this book. And I've started another series called Mixed Declassified Shattering Survival Guide, magical event that ends the world. Essentially, the skies literally shatter like glass. So I'm just giving tips on how to survive in this new world. And some of them are references to the content within the book. Some of them are just kind of goofy advices for surviving in general. But that's something I only recently started doing, and I'm really enjoying it because I think people like it, and I've had a lot of engagement on the one where rate my chances of survival, and that's something I'm also doing when people request a signed copy. Is I write the odds of them surviving the first 30 days. So like I had a signing of the week, and a couple came who I knew from college, and one got 0% because there's a character based on them who dies, and the other got 100% because there's a character based on them that lives.
Oh, that's so fun. I want to know what my odds are now. Like I said, I do have a sword, so at least I've got some kind of, and an attic. Yeah, I've thought about this.
So, and that's a factor, like, right? What we consider is location. So it depends on what kind of creatures are around. If you live in New York, your chances are pretty low because of water displacement. Most of New York is wiped out. If you have a career experience, like Army experience, that's going to increase your chances of survival. If you have an actual physical sword, that launches your survival rates up high because, spoiler alert, swords have a better chance against some creatures and entities than firearms do.
Let's go.
Magic involvement and stuff. And so
Love it.
the main character has a cursed black sword that he's wielding from the very beginning that saves his life. And, he starts getting weird dreams and seeing a creature every time he sheds blood with it that tempts him with offers of power in exchange for killing, which is a whole subplot. But yeah, swords and weapons, martial weapons become involved because it's not our opinion was, it's not fun if the elves show up or the orcs show up in mass and then a tank just rolls over them. So magic is the great equalizer in this situation, So you have certain advantages, but they're not all the same advantages. So you have to learn, the characters have to learn to adapt in this new martial setting.
Wow, I love that. You kind of mentioned that you guys are going to be writing more of these books, potentially a trilogy. So expand on that a little bit. What's next for you as authors?
Yeah, currently we're working on book 2. So we're hard at work at it. We are almost done with the first draft. We're very close. We've got I've actually started writing we've gotten through all the main chapters that we initially wanted to write. So after we're done with that, we go back and we're both going to reread the first book and then tackle the second draft of the second book and make sure things are consistent across the board. And then one of the things we like to do, especially, and I figured this out from the first book, the second draft focuses a lot more on individual character dialogue and individual characterization of dialogue, as well as settings, which I don't focus as much setting description in the first draft. I focus more on that in the second draft so I can get the story figured out in more detail. So that's our current project, is finish the second book and then, of course, write the third one. We're leaning toward getting both done before releasing the second one to try and capitalize on having them both finished so we can release them in a lot quicker succession. And then Dave's working on his horror novella. We're also putting together ideas for like an RPG podcast set in the world. I'm looking at potentially reading chapters as a podcast, and then we're also looking into an audiobook. So we've got a lot of feelers. Dave mentioned earlier Star Wars and that's a universe with multiple authors and involvement, and that's something we really is one of our end goals, is having this be a franchise where we bring in other creators and other authors to create stories within this world, because it's a great backdrop to tell any kind of story.
Neat.
You can tell a horror, you can tell a romance, you can do some romantasy if you want, and explore different areas that we haven't gotten to. If someone approaches me and is like, hey, I want to write a book set in your world that takes place in England, cool, let's figure it out and sort that out and build this up into a bigger shared universe of stories that take place with this backdrop.
if you can expand the universe, totally go for it. So, David, with the spin-offs, would you be setting them also in Georgia or like different locations? And how many are you thinking?
Mainline story, as it were, right, is sort of southeast centric, right? Not a lot of transportation opportunities when planes don't work anymore. So the project I'm sort of starting now is a branch off of that, so it'll also be in this local area. However, like Mick touched on, if we're going to do a project or someone else is going to approach and say, "Hey, look, like this is what I'm interested in," we're trying to shy people away, I guess, in a sense, from using that exact location, right? So that there's no cross interactions that have to be, hammered out later. One of the benefits of having a shared world is that, multiple people can get their hands in it. But one of the negatives is you then have to stop and make sure you're not stepping on people's toes. The tabletop sort of setting, I'm a big tabletop nerd. And so that we're trying to set, more Colorado, Utah, sort of out west for the express purpose of, well, let's see what's happening out here. And there's going to be no interaction at all. So the setting is the same, the races and technology is all the same, but it's a whole new slew of characters that can have their own adventure and not be beholden to, oh, well, on page 71, this person said that, makes it way easier, especially in a medium where anything can happen to any character at any time, right? That Nat 1 comes up and messes up a whole series of books. You don't want that to happen. So my project, this current project is a branch off of this already written one, Paragon Exordium. Part of the initial kind of push the characters have is, hey, our area is cool, but we need to see what the rest of the world's doing. And so one of the point of views is following, this kind of mission. And that's the most successful one. The other missions are meet with mixed and disastrous success. And so when you have a team of people that go out and never come back, the question in my mind was, well, what happened to them? And so I want to explain, hey, well, these people are written off, they're never coming back. Well, now I get to see how that, came to be. And that's kind of where I was looking at it from. And a challenge for me, right? I've never done something independent of this. And I think what Mick touched on earlier about there being different genres that are possible. I'd like to explore, something that's hard to say darker, because I think our universe right now is dark, but it can always get a little more strange. Like you said as well, I got my undergraduate degrees in literature. And that was in Georgia. So a lot of Southern Gothic influence from a lot of the people that I talked to, right? And so I'd like to, I guess, pay homage to that a little bit, right? And explore it in that kind of way.
You guys are building something so cool. You guys are very unique. I love that we have both of you on the show and that we're getting to kind of hear about your plans. Please stay in touch with the Ink Mages, because I love what you guys are doing and what you're building. It's very exciting. I'd love to hear from each one of you. Mick, we'll start with you. What's some advice that you would give someone in writing a book, starting to write their first draft even?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. My primary advice I go to is keep writing it. If you can get just one chapter done and then a second chapter done and then a third chapter done, you're leagues ahead of everyone else who says they're writing a book. The key is, even if it's not great, just keep writing it until you have something and you can fix it later, or you can fix it along the way. But just get through the first 3 chapters, and then you can't give up because you've already got 3 chapters and you can't just leave those alone.
How about you, Dave?
I'd also mirror it. Starting always seems to be the hardest part. What I would say is a benefit of this relationship has been that since there's 2 of us, we get to keep each other accountable, right? So having someone or some other entity out there that keeps you on task, right? Whether that's a family member, a friend, a group of individuals on TikTok, whatever it may be, if you are not beholden to, but hey, these people are counting on this to be a thing, right? It kind of keeps you on task, right? We've had many years of this, and there's been plenty of times where it's a Wednesday night and Mick hits me up and says, hey, I finished this chapter. You want to look at it? And I'm like, well, if we're going to meet on Saturday, I guess I got to do it. Right. And so it goes kind of back and forth. At the beginning of Paragon Exordium, it was being published on a monthly basis on Patreon.
Yep.
And so there was a financial incentive to a degree, but also all of Mick's fans and supporters were happy and anxious for the next one, right? So when you have comments all coming through that say, oh, wow, that was great, then you're, oh, well, I can't let people down.
Yeah, I think that's so vital, is having a critique partner, somebody to just keep that skin in the game that keeps you motivated. Tell us where we can find out more information about you and where we can buy your book.
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I have an Etsy shop with signed copies that is available in the U.S. If you want to support an author and have Amazon take less off the top, because it is a large book, so it's expensive because it has to be, because it takes a lot to print. But it is a little pricey, but it's well worth it. Well worth the story. People have really been enjoying it. But I'm on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and X. I'm most active on TikTok. We recently got David on TikTok, and we're trying to get him more of a following, kicking and screaming.
Welcome.
So you can find me on all of those platforms as Mikel Melwasul. That is my pen name. It is a creation. And then David is david.elberin on TikTok. That's his only social media that's available right now. But he's going to be doing a series pretty soon here where he explores why different fandoms and groupings would enjoy Paragon Exordium.
I was listening to some of your other episodes beforehand, and someone on here said that they were a big Battlestar Galactica. You had found Battlestar Galactica comics back in the day, right? So, I'm a big Battlestar Galactica fan, at least the newer one. So something, I'm going to look at is, hey, how would someone who enjoyed that show enjoy this? And I think I could find it 5 things in rather short order that you would enjoy about it. So that's kind of my support role for all of his social media things.
I will say,
hey, let's bring people in. We had so many people that, at least when I shared it with a lot of my kind of sci-fi nerd friends, were like, dang, this is a lot of Warhammer stuff going on with it. Let's try to, bring it all in.
And neither of us have ever played Warhammer.
You can find Mick somewhere. You can then find me, and you'll be able to work through it. So.
Well, we'll be sure to leave all of your links in the description. And you guys, it's Christmas. Christmas is coming soon. So support these guys. Go get on the Etsy shop. Go on Amazon. Buy a copy of their books. I'm going to buy a copy of the book. I'm very inspired to read it. It sounds amazing.
Thank you.
So be sure to follow Mikel and David. Make sure to buy their books. Leave a like, leave a comment, and join us on the Ink Mages. We'll see you next time.